Newsflash, Fox Business announces that there's a brand new $50 million threat to Tesla. We also follow up with the fact that the first batch of batteries being used in China is, according to Clean Technica, a 8,000 vehicle load of batteries from the primary gigafactory. So we dive into the conversation of this as well. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also wanted to note that we appreciate it if you like the show, if you'd like and subscribe. Makes a big difference in every way for us to execute a better show and provide better information in the process. Also wanted to thank our Patreon supporters. Your assistance is actually greatly appreciated. So every day we make an effort to scan the news headlines to determine if there's new information that we might want to cover in a show. And we have a backlog of what we feel are interesting things to cover. But there was a headline that came across from Fox Business News indicating that there's a new $50 billion threat to Tesla. And after reading the article, we thought it was worth the time to respond based on the fact that it had come from a credible news organization and is kind of making the rounds. So the first thing, well, we'll go through the facts of what they stated first, and then we'll sort of go into what our response is to it here. So Fox, owned by Rupert Murdoch, made a point of introducing the concept that there's a brand new $50 billion threat to Tesla that will eventually end its dominance. What's fascinating about this circumstance is the fact that that $50 billion threat turns out to be the merger of Peugeot, Nissan, and Fiat. And so we were kind of surprised to learn that this was actually the threat that was being announced. And so the first part is the fact that those three companies are merging. Number two is the fact that the net market cap of those companies is $50 billion, a la the threat that's being indicated. Number three, the suggestion from a private equity manager that was referenced is that when facing threats of this nature, there's a high likelihood that Tesla's going to have to merge to avoid sort of being wiped out by the threat of a company like this. So, the comment's a little bit more intense than that. And if you guys want more info on it, you can definitely read the comments that were made by the Fox folks. So our response to this is, number one, part of the reason the companies are merging is the fact that Tesla is gaining so much in sales that it's starting to weaken some of the smaller auto companies like Peugeot and Fiat. So that is our first response, and so we thought this was kind of interesting. The second issue that popped up is that Tesla's market cap is like $57 billion currently, which is $7 billion more than the merger of those three companies. So in light of this, Tesla's actually a bigger entity in theory because of the size of the market cap. So in theory, those three companies, in theory, should be more fearful of what's going on at Tesla than vice versa. The third issue that comes up is that Fiat recently signed an agreement, recently being a year and a half ago, signed an agreement with Tesla where, combined with General Motors this past year, the last time we actually had numbers was November of 2018, there was a $300 million check written by those two companies to Tesla because there are certain credits that one needs to have in order to deal with the pollution credits. So basically what's happening is still in the US, but also primarily in Europe, there's a phenomenon where you have large companies selling particularly SUVs. And if those entities do not meet certain thresholds of electric vehicles, they now have to pay the EU certain fees. So basically in penalties. And so one way to offset those penalties is to pay Tesla and get in what's called a pooling process, where the number of vehicles Tesla sells, particularly as they increase in a pooling process, helps these other companies, and the fee to Tesla is less than they'd have to pay in fines, so it's well worth the effort. And as we famously discussed, the CEO of Fiat pointed out that he would appreciate it if you did not buy his electric vehicle, because he lost $13,000 on every one, even though he had to make them to be credible. So, so bottom line here is that Fiat / this merger is under an agreement to actually pay Tesla, because they're not both producing and selling enough electric vehicles to be viable in the space. The fourth issue that comes up is that Tesla went from being, let's call it a $57 billion threat to competing entities, to now, with the backing of China, the fact is that China has sort of given signals that they want 4 or 5 factories that make Tesla vehicles throughout the country, and they seem to have an eye towards becoming the export center for Tesla vehicles. So we were kind of blown away by the fact that now that Tesla has a sort of a rich uncle in the form of China, you now have the potential for Tesla to expand dramatically and not at all be, feeling anything other than thrilled at the fact that they actually don't have to worry about bankrolling their future, because they've got a rich uncle in the form of China that's willing to do so. So let's call it China's $50 to $100 billion plus Tesla's is about $150 billion to face up against the major European players. The next thing that comes to mind for us is, why is a $50 billion threat referenced by Fox that big a deal? And the reason we say that is that Daimler-Benz is about a $65 billion company. VW is someplace in the 50 billion range, and GM is at 50 billion itself. So if you add up the market caps of those companies, you're talking $150 billion threat to Tesla that has proven to be no problem so far. So we're not getting why the merger of those 3 companies should be really that big a deal, because Tesla's been dealing with that threat already effectively, and Tesla's also the reason why those companies have to merge, because of how much market share Tesla's taking, particularly on their most profitable vehicles. So the next thing that we wanted to cover is the fact that it's always impressive to note how many individual news outlets run by, some heavy folks that are incentivized by the auto companies are able to access the primary news outlets with no problem and present stories, and those stories can have a short blip on the stock price of companies like Tesla because it sounds threatening out of the box. But the basis of the research seems to be very thin, if not horrible. So the note here is that there is this $50 billion threat that has been referenced by Fox Business. But the problem is that $50 billion threat is actually going to be paying, we believe, between $1 and $2 billion to Tesla next year, because they can't sell enough of the vehicles that they're producing. So we're fascinated by how this is all going to play out, but we're also looking forward to when Fox decides to put out another story that reflects a different set of facts. The second thing we wanted to dive into today is the fact that it was just announced in an article by Clean Technica that there's a stockpiling of batteries to the tune of about 8,000 vehicles worth in the China marketplace. All of the approvals evidently have not been there, even though most of them are for the China launch. But it turns out that, we have 8,000 vehicles ready, and they've now started sort of low run production to make sure everything is properly calibrated. So this brings up another issue, which is there's been a back and forth between our viewers, some of the news outlets, etc., related to where the batteries coming from when it comes to the China factory, and are there enough of them for Tesla to produce enough vehicles to make a real profit on that building. So the suggestion by Clean Technica was that ahead of LG starting to make the batteries that would go in the Model 3 in China, part of this whole thing is that we have a situation currently. Obviously, notifications should be stopped, and we'll make a note of that. And we're definitely going to get notes from you guys. So we're going to end up having to wrap up our segment today, but the primary focus is just the fact that we know the batteries are coming for Panasonic, and we have argued it's going to continue to come from Panasonic, but there are reports that LG will be the provider, and we just want to note that that's not happening. So, any rate, we have a bunch of other things we'd like to cover. Unfortunately, our time is truncated today. Elon did indicate that batteries. Wow. Well, any rate, we definitely have to bail early. Just wanted to note, I want to thank you for taking time out to join us. This is Greg from Tesla Fan Insight. Tschüss, macht's gut, au revoir, lehitraot, choda hafez, and we look forward to your comments on our show today.